If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who drive in remote areas, truckers, drivers, etc., what is your most paranormal experience? Got to see the black dog. Had been running a long week and long hours in an industry very similar to truck driving but less regulated. I can't say how many hours I had been driving that day, but the people talking on the radio had stopped making sense. They had faded into a white noise din along with the ever-present whistle of wind and turbo. I had stopped babbling to stay occupied. I was driving as a robot and not fully aware of where on the familiar mountain route I was. The beast was beside the truck and the size of a car in the shoulder lane. It was keeping pace at 70 miles per hour, but the legs moved slower. It was like a shadow and had form, but when you looked, it disappeared. It existed only in my peripheral. The black dog is said to be an omen of death, and they aren't wrong. I wasn't falling asleep, the energy shooters were making sure of that, but my brain was entirely shutting down. It's something buried in your subconscious that can only be accessed in your deepest primordial lizard brain. At first it was confusing but not scary, though I should have been scared. I should have slept but chose to continue on and end my week in my bed. I could have died or killed a van full of nuns and orphans coming back from free puppy day at the shelter. I chose to keep trucking, and that choice made me the monstrous demon in the night. My dad's been a truck driver for 6 years now. He told me his scariest experience was when he stopped in Colorado to take a nap because he was getting sleepy after an 11-hour drive. He said the truck stop he was at was completely surrounded by a forest that went for miles. After about an hour or so, he suddenly woke up to a loud thump on his hood. He slowly got up and moved the curtains that separate the beds from the driver's seat, and lo and behold were two of biggest wolves he'd ever seen, he said. They gave him a deadpan stare as soon as they noticed him. My dad immediately honked his horn and they jumped off, yet he said he didn't sleep after that. He later grabbed his gun after he thought it was safe and went for a coffee. Then resumed his drive. His story didn't sound that scary, until I looked up the size of a wolf. Apparently, those duckers are huge. Former trucker here. Was driving north through the mountains of Colorado towards Pueblo, and it was my first time dealing with anything like the Rocky Mountains, so I was taking it nice and slow with my hazards on and in the right lane. This was in the spring, and there wasn't much snow on the ground aside from a light dusting. I remember passing another truck pulled to the shoulder on my way up, nothing out of the ordinary. However, as I was heading down the mountain, which can be scary as shit in an 18-wheeler, trust me, I saw the same truck I passed earlier fly by me in the left-hand lane. Now being passed on the left going downhill in the Rocky Mountains by another tractor trailer is crazy enough, but what really makes this story is this guy's trailer brakes were on fire. He was pulling a load, could tell because the trailer was sealed, and if you know anything about trucks, you know there's only so much braking you're supposed to do before they overheat and, worst case, catch fire. This guy's truck looked like a ducking comet as he sped down the mountain at what I thought was a surely to be deadly pace. I grabbed the mic to the radio and called out to him, "Hey driver. Your brakes are on fire. I mean literally on fire." This rough and weathered sounding voice comes back over the speaker of my radio and says, "Cool as a cucumber, I know." And he disappeared around a curve. I never saw any wrecked truck, emergency crews, or even mention of an accident over the radio. I did see a discarded fire extinguisher on the ground at the base of the mountain though. Just one of many awesome stories. Middle of winter, about 4 a.m., at least 30 inches of snow cover on the ground, not the road. I was driving back from a casino towards Virginia MN, just north of Cloquet MN. My friend and I were about 4 car lengths behind a pickup truck and gaining, so I went to switch lanes. Out of the corner of my eye I noticed movement, looked just in time to see some sort of bipedal running full speed across the road, in front of the truck, into the right of way, and off into a forest. The truck slammed on his brakes, as did I. My friend and I looked at each other slack-jawed as we crept past the truck in complete shock. I would have stopped and spoke with that truck driver to see if he got a better glimpse as he was a yard away from smoking the goddamn thing. Nope. I know I saw a midget Bigfoot. Around 2007 to 2008 I was a trucker, and it was about 2:30 in the morning in Georgia. I was in the sticks about 100 miles north of Atlanta on I-75, and I was alone in a drop yard for trailers. I was there to drop off my current trailer and hook another one. All I had to do was go pick up my paperwork from the mailbox and go. I loved shit like this, no bullshit, load is ready for me to pick up, no waiting around, great. Now, my entire life, there has been this weird phenomenon that has followed me. You know those halogen street lights? I would say about 60 to 70% of those lights I walk under will go dark. It's the strangest thing, If I walk down a street at night, it's not strange at all if every light I walk under goes out, and when I walk away from it, it comes back on. I walk the streets in darkness. I have no idea why it happens. Anyway, back to Georgia. I've dropped my first trailer, backed under the trailer I'm picking up, got my paperwork, and I'm raising the landing gear. I'm standing under a big street light, and guess what? It goes out. No big deal, but I say out loud to no one in particular, I wonder why that always happens? At that point, the craziest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life, happened. A calm voice from about 3 feet away said, "Show of respect." A voice. No one was around for miles. I was out in the middle of nowhere, there was no one there, I heard it plain as day. It was a man's voice, it wasn't loud, scary or intimidating, it spoke very matter-of-factly, "Show of respect." I freaked out, jumped in the truck and moved 80,000 pounds faster than I ever thought I could move it. Back in November 2018, I'd say about 10 p.m. my husband, driving, and I were driving over a viaduct, probably going about 50 miles per hour. Traffic wasn't heavy, but there were definitely more than a few other cars all around. All of a sudden there is this thing, inches front, walking directly in front of me on the passenger side. I squeezed my eyes shut, thinking we were about to hit it. Which should have happened the moment my eyes closed. But it didn't. I looked in the side mirror, to see if it just stepped back. Then looked at the driver's side and I noticed my husband was sitting up and looking in the rear view mirror. I just sat back kinda stunned, but I didn't say anything. He ended up saying something along the lines of what the duck was and did you see that? When my husband saw it, it was directly in front of him, then it was behind us and the car that was behind us swerved to avoid whatever the duck it was. I have no idea what it was. The closest description I can give is it looked like Hoggle from the Labyrinth movie. It had gnarly looking facial features. All of its facial features were undoubtedly human in every way, but like bigger and thicker. No taller than 4, brown skin, it had ducking clothes on. I can't remember if it had hair, but its arms were extremely long. It was like Hummingbird fast, moved in a literal blink of the eye. This thing looked extremely confident, comfortable on 2 legs. So I'm not really superstitious, but I was driving through the holler in WV late at night one time and an injured dog darted out in front of me. He looked like a yellow lab with a broken hind leg. Assuming it had already been struck once, I stopped to check on it and see if it had an address on the collar. I get out of my car and look down the embankment. There's a deep ditch, a small strip of grass and then a rocky drop into the river. The dog was nowhere to be seen. It was like it vanished into thin air. Thinking it ran off and hid like injured animals do, I got back in my car and left. I thought nothing of it until 6 months later while perusing YouTube. I came across a video, Most Haunted Roads in WV, and clicked on it out of pure curiosity. Partway through they start talking about an isolated stretch of highway in the Appalachian Mountains. They said there is a legend of a dog ghost that will appear in the middle of the road at night and try to lure unsuspecting travelers into the woods to get lost. At this point I get full body chills. Then they said the name of the route and I nearly threw my computer across the room. Same road. I'm a little stitious now. Both these things happened in New Mexico in roughly the same place. Driving from Belen to Mountain Air, there's a long, like almost an hour, of straight flat road called Becker Flats. Becker Flats is kind of a local reputation for weird shit. Drug smugglers land planes on the highway there, strange animals are spotted, UFOs, and there's a ranch called Mountain Shadows off the flats that has a lot of rumors about it that I'm sure are not true, just your basic satanic panic bullshit. Still, in 1990, I was driving across Becker Flats about 9 p.m. and an ant the size of a shoebox ran out into the road. It was clearly an ant, 6 legs, 3 body sections, and antennae. It was just about 14 inches long. I was going about 70 miles per hour with the high beams on. It stopped when the light hit it, and I didn't have time to swerve. Both front and rear tires hit it and the car lifted up rather than crushing it, making a tremendous noise like I'd gone over a speed bump at 70. Scared the piss out of me. Another time, several months later, I was in about the same place, but right after sunset. About 7 o'clock. The spot where this occurred was at least still a 30-minute drive from my destination, Mountain Air, where I lived. I passed a guy walking on the side of the highway the same direction I was going. It was so unusual to see a pedestrian that I slowed down to get a look at him. He was a Native American, most likely a Navajo, with long hair in a bun, a red bandana tied around his forehead like a sweatband, and wearing jeans, a blue t-shirt, and an old army field jacket, just odd green with no camouflage pattern, like Vietnam era, with lighter sections on the sleeves where there clearly used to be 3 stripes like a sergeant. He was wearing black pointy-toed cowboy boots and a silver concho belt. I thought, that's odd, and kept driving. When I got to town a half an hour later, I passed the Mountain Air Cantina on the main drag, and the same guy was pulling open the door to walk inside. The speed limit on the drag is 30, so I was going very slow and could get a good look at him. Exact same bandana, belt, boots, and jacket. As I crept past, he turned and looked right in my eyes and held the gaze until I was gone. No other cars had passed me on the way to town, and even if he had hitched a ride right after I saw him on the flats, there was no way he could have gotten there first, unless he was in a plane. I told some friends about it in case they knew the guy, and they said I should be careful for a while, as I had been marked by a skinwalker. I thought that was bullshit, but asked a couple other guys I knew who were Navajo and Zuni about the guy and told them what I saw, and they said the same thing, except they also said to never mention it again. Saw what appeared to be an animal on side of highway, that had been hit. Looking at it as I passed, it was laying with its back to the road and appeared to have a split on the back. Like what happens when a muscly animal takes a heavy hit and the skin splits. Not an explosion like what happens when smaller agile animals get hit on highway. And its fur was dark AMD matty, so you'd think bear? But the fur was too long. Shaggy almost. Seeing this all in a matter of seconds. I got off next exit and looped back around as it was around 2 to 3 a.m. There's no traffic and I'm working. By the 10 minutes it took me to get back, it was gone. I'm convinced it was a baby squatch. And mom dragged it off. I sure as hell wasn't getting out to investigate. My husband's story. He was driving up north to Camarillo, California to visit family late at night. And at a certain point, the freeway became almost desolate. Rarely would he see a car or two pass by. So in his sleepy state, he starts to notice that a car was staying very close to him. Confusion sets in because there was more space for the person in the car to move around. So he speeds up a little more, and yet, the car persists. At this point, my husband became a little more alert and started trying to speed up to get the car off his tail. He loses focus on the speed trying to lose the car. Suddenly, relief washes over him as the familiar colors of red and blue illuminate right behind him in the car. That's when he realized he had gone over 100 and slowly comes to a stop. The car slowed down and pulled over in front of him. He waited and sighed a breath of relief when the officer tapped on his window and asked for license and registration. My husband complies while the officer questions him. As he digs around, the officer goes silent. When my husband goes to hand him the papers, he asks the officer what is wrong. The officer is staring ahead and my husband follows his gaze to find the car gone. That's when the fear sets in. No sign of it anywhere. The officer instantly tells him to get the hell out of there and both take off. The officer followed my husband for a while to ensure he was safe. And my husband never ran into the car again. I was driving home from work one night. I worked in the city, but lived about 40 minutes away at the time. I was on a rural road for about 10 minutes after leaving town, and then suddenly there were lights behind me. A van had followed me with their lights off and turned them on just as they'd pulled up to me. It scared the hell out of me. I slowed down and they pulled up beside me, so I rolled my window down and the guy yelled, "What the duck?" And then started to shout at the guy in the back, but I couldn't tell what he'd said. I stepped on the gas to get out of there. They didn't follow me, and turned around to go back into town. I was freaking out. If I'm ever followed like that again, I'll just keep driving and call the cops. They clearly thought I was someone else, but that could have gone very badly for me that night. It still creeps me out thinking about it. I was driving home through Kentucky. It was the middle of the night and we were going to run out of gas. I pulled off a remote exit for gas but the station was closed. There was a police car idling on the side of the lot so I went over to ask if he knew where the closest open station was. But the officer didn't move. It was like he was sleeping but in a horrible position. I tried knocking on the window again and nothing. I noticed the fog was starting to roll in like a bad horror movie so I got back in my car and headed back for the interstate. There was a mileage sign coming up and as I got closer I saw a girl standing by the sign. I turned to look behind me as I drove past but she was gone. She couldn't have been older than 10 in pigtail braids and a nightgown. I finally found an open station at the next exit but all anyone did was stare at me. Not a single word. Needless to say I got the duck out of there. The story I'm about to tell is completely true. The story I'm about to tell is completely true, having said that there are some disclaimers I will add at the end. About 5 years ago I moved to the city I'm living in now to go to school. Before I moved I was living about 1,400 kilometers west of my present location, and was working as a pump technician in a rural Albertan municipality. The month before I moved I had to make a number of few trips back and forth to finalize everything, find an apartment etc. Anyway, what happened took place on one of the return trips. It was late at night, and I was about 2 hours away from the town that was my home at the time. Now, this was only my second time making this return drive, and because I didn't have the route perfectly worked out, I was using a GPS to supplement my knowledge of the road. I reached an area where I knew I had to make an exit. The problem was that I couldn't remember which one it was. I looked at the GPS and it told me I still had about a kilometer before my turn. I continued driving and looked at the GPS periodically to gauge the distance. When I was about 500 meters from my turn, the GPS began to flicker for a few moments, and then displayed a route reconfiguration screen. The GPS now told me to drive an extra 15 kilometers and turn off on a different exit. Now, I was in no mood to argue with my GPS, so I figured, duck it, it's calculating for the quickest route, what's the worst that can happen? So I complied. I took the turn the GPS told me to take, and drove along the road for about 45 minutes with no problem. My iPod was dead, so I was listening to the radio, and chain smoking my cigarettes, just having the best time I could possibly have alone on a highway at 3 a.m. after having already driven 9 to 10 hours. That's around the point I began entering a dense fog. This was one of those fogs where you can barely see the road in front of you, the kind where you have to kill your high beams because their reflection is blinding. While driving through this fog, I began to notice that parts of the road felt a little weird to drive on, and when I hit sections where the fog cleared, the highway was suddenly a good 15 feet above the ditches. You literally could not see the ditches on either side of the road, just the fields they climbed towards. It looked as though the highway was a winding bridge. What was worse, however, was what had been making the odd sounds on the road. Roadkill. But, not just your everyday run-of-the-mill squirrel, porcupine or other small animals. It was more like somebody fed a deer a stick dynamite and then set it off. Animals had exploded all over the road, as if a semi had been plowing into animals at an incredible speed. It wasn't even just one or two animals either. Every kilometer had at least two exploded-looking animals on the pavement that I could see between the intermittent walls of fog. I looked at the GPS again, and it said that I had about 80 kilometers to my turn off, which was a problem, because I was only doing about 60 as the conditions were absolute shit. I sucked it up. It wasn't like I had much of a choice anyway. The radio lost its signal around this point. Two stations were fighting over the only frequency that seemed to be getting any signal whatsoever. I turned it down a bit and lit up another cigarette. Then I noticed a yellow glow on the side of the road, coming from the ditch. Instinctively slowed down in case it might have been a deer or something. As I passed by, going about 30, it didn't look like a deer at all. It looked hairless, and sort of had a dark mustard sort of color to it. It was right at the edge of the highway too, as if peering over from the ditch. I cannot say for certain, but it almost looked human-like. As though it were bipedal, but its eyes were golden. What was most off-putting is that when I drove by it, it hunkered down, as if it were trying hide, with only its eyes visible. And as I passed, its head turned and it got up a bit again, watching me drive off. That really freaked me out. Little did I know shit was about to get crazy. As you can imagine, I didn't know what to think about whatever it is I may or may not have seen by the ditch, but rest assured I just wanted to get home by this point. The fog cleared considerably by this point, and the fields along the sides of the highway had slowly progressed into a heavily wooded area that didn't seem to be populated whatsoever. I started to realize there was a problem when I was about 2 kilometers away from the highway I was supposed to turn onto. There was no apparent highway in the distance. When I got 300 meters away, still no highway. I got closer and closer. The GPS told me I'd need to turn right in 200 meters. Then 100 meters. Then 50. And then it tells me not to turn right, but to turn left instead. And this all so confusing because there should have been a highway, but all I could see was a single, tiny, dirt road that trailed off into the woods. I really should have known better. Should have known that turning down that road was a bad idea, but what else was I supposed to do? I turned left, onto this dirt road, which was more like a path. It was so narrow. My car barely fit onto it. What happened next is the most frightening thing that has ever happened in my life. The road started doubling back towards the direction I had come from, like a half circle, and the road so narrow, and the trees so thick that I couldn't actually see what I was turning towards until it already completed the turn. Once I had my way around the half circle, the dirt road ended and led into a small clearing. Inside that clearing? Oh, just an abandoned church and graveyard. I looked up at the bell tower and saw what I was, and sometimes still am, convinced was a silhouette staring down on me. I looked down at my GPS, and on its screen flashed the 3 most terrifying words imaginable. You have arrived, and through the static in the radio, I could have sworn I heard a scream. I'm driving to a friend's house. I live in urban NC, he lives in the middle of bumduck nowhere with his parents. Usually we'd both be at college, but it's winter break and we've been itching to see each other for a while due to shared interests. Anyways, I make it a fair way into the rolling, forested, brown rural Piedmont, and there's just great visibility. You can see all the way to the top of the next hill, the sky is clear and blue, and there's no other cars. Pop! Something whaps against my back window and there's a flash in the side of my vision. I'm driving a small 2-door car, and so whatever the duck it was, I was going 55, was right there. Okay. I'm not one to freak out, and I checked my rear view mirror expecting a bird carcass. Maybe a swan or something else white that looked like a flash ran into my car. Well, I see a few more flashes from a power line and realizes a transformer must have blown out, and either a bit of debris hit my window or maybe a jolt of electricity. Completely normal event. Odd, but explainable. I get to my friend's house 5 minutes later expecting him to not have power, but no. He does. Huh. Well, the visit goes well, we chat, we make cookies. It gets dark and I decide to head back. So on my way back, I take a quick look as I'm driving to check out the state of the line, curious if it's still sparking. It's not, everything about the back country is normal. I get an odd feeling as I pass by, the whole neck hair standing up thing, but I brush it off. Probably just electricity in the air, not surprising. But for some reason, I take one more look in the rearview mirror. I think it was just to get one more little check for sparks. It wasn't like there was anything else interesting to check out in the middle of nowhere. My red taillights illuminate the side of the hill just enough for me to see a humanoid figure standing there, beside the poet line. Its neck was far too long to be normal, and it sure as hell hadn't been there as I was heading toward hitting on a guardrail. I got a horrible feeling in my gut. I felt as though this guy was going to do something bad. I honestly felt as though he was going to jump in front of our truck to commit suicide or something. As we got closer, he stood up. I moved into the next lane. As we got closer, he started walking into the road. I started panicking. There was no time to slow down, and I could not swerve to avoid him for fear of rolling the truck. My friend and I started screaming. Just as we were about to hit what I thought was a man, it jumped and revealed wings, then vaulted over the entire truck. It was only visible for a second, but I can still remember it clear as day. It had the body of a man from the head to the waist, but from its waist down was hairy. The wings were also dark. The feet were the worst. Instead of human feet, there were these horrible talons, similar to that of a chicken, but also dark and hairy. The best comparison I can make is that it looked like a human-sized gargoyle. I know this sounds like a load of nonsense, and I probably wouldn't believe it either, but I swear it's the truth. In total honesty, I wish it wasn't true. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. If my friend hadn't seen it as well, I would think I'd gone crazy. I was driving home from San Jose to San Francisco late at night several years ago. I was dead tired but wanted to sleep in my own bed that night. I was falling asleep and was behind an SUV with the spare tire on the back, a Zuzu, perhaps? Anyway, my eyes are getting heavy and I'm on Highway 101 trying to stay awake when I see a figure in white hanging from the spare tire of the car in front of me. I slightly freak out and force myself awake. I look again and see nothing but the spare tire. At that point I figure I really should just pull over and take a nap, which I did. This other time I'm heading to Lakeport, which is about a couple hours north of San Francisco. There's a stretch of road going over a mountain where the road is really narrow. There's a few spots where you can park your car in case of emergency. It was really late at night and I'm driving by one of those spots where a car is parked. The dome light is on in this car and I can see someone in the driver's side. I'm looking and this youngish woman with a freakishly weird smile is just staring at me as I drive past. It still gives me goosebumps now as I type this. The weirder thing is a couple of days later I'm on the same road heading back from Lakeport and I see the same car still parked there. Makes me wonder who that person was. My sister visited our parents in around '82, she lived in Toronto. I wasn't born yet. Our parents live in a rural area, and one of the areas you have to drive through was at the time a heavily wooded area. Still is, just less so my sister left around 9 p.m., drives through the area, and gets beyond it, then her car breaks down, thankfully in front of a family friend's house. She calls Dad, he comes get her. As they're driving back to the house, it's about 10 p.m. or so, and they're just chatting and listening to the radio when they heard an incredibly loud scream, louder than the engine, then the radio, then them talking. Dad slams on the brakes, and they're like, WTF was that, when all of a sudden a coyote or something walks in front of the car, on two legs, and this thing is like 6 or 7 feet tall. It also had an unusual tail that was a black and white stripe. It walked in front of the car, into the trees on the other side, then they heard the scream again and Dad got the duck out of there. He never saw anything like it again. Wasn't even driving that far. But on a rural highway on the way back to my college town in the middle of the night, maybe 3 a.m. or so, I was with my friend. This is rural western Oklahoma, fairly flat. A deer or something on the side of the road or even crossing it at night isn't anything unusual. Dark as hell. No street lights or anything, just the occasional reflector. But this wasn't a deer. It looked like a mountain lion, but it walked like a deer, and it didn't have a head. Normally animals' eyes are reflective in headlights, but there were no eyes. It walked across the road about 50 feet in front of my car, passed through my headlights, and turned and walked back in the same direction. I thought I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation, but then my friend said, what the duck was that and where was its head? There aren't enough mountain lions/bobcats in the area for me to seriously consider that could be what it was. But I don't know what else it could be. But it didn't have a head. While I was in the Marine Corps, I was duty driver for my battalion. It's essentially a 24-hour shift where I drive around base to stop at different companies. Normally you get at least 4 hours of sleep, however, our duty OIC was some dickhead quo and never let me go on my sleeping post. So myself and the staff sergeant that I'm on duty with go on a rove around 3 a.m., almost 20 hours into the shift and I'm exhausted. There we are driving down an empty, foggy road. If you know Camp Pendleton, that crap gets foggy in the middle of the night, when out of nowhere something runs across the road, scaring the shit out of me. I brake really hard thinking it might have been a coyote or whatever, but it was way too big to be a coyote. I look at the staff sergeant and he's looking at me as if he didn't see whatever just passed us. We head back to the battalion building and he's acting weird around me, so for the rest of the duty I wonder if something actually crossed the street, paranormal or not, or did I imagine something there? Okay, so this is from my grandmother who used to own a construction company in Taiwan. She was a badass in that, you know, the construction business always has ties to gangs etc., and that she was a woman who owned one. They dealt with stones, like quarry stuff I guess? She was in a truck with her driver, coming back at night on a winding mountain road when her driver was like, "Ma'am, I can't drive anymore, I'm seeing double roads all of a sudden. We need to stop." Now, in Chinese folklore, when you start seeing 2 roads when you know there should only be one, it means that there's a malicious ghost trying to trick you to fall off a cliff/crash. So they stop and park on the side of the road to wait for this to clear up. About 10 minutes in, a wolf or a wild dog comes out of the mountains and starts circling their truck, snapping and growling at something. Then all of a sudden they hear it yelp in pain and see it go flying as if it got kicked really hard by something. It runs off. They waited until sunrise, which was like 3 hours, to start again, but it freaked them out. Not more than a few days ago I'm positive I caught a glimpse of a pair of skinny, gray legs of someone or something, X-Files theme, just slipping in between some trees as I drove through an uninhabited area with nothing but trees and darkness around me. I had just been at the store, heading home, and it was kinda late, and the sun had been down for a few hours already. I had some decent music on, and was in a generally good mood, so catching a glimpse of whatever that stuff was, kinda took me by surprise. As far as the size/length of the legs goes, I would have guesstimated human-sized, though a lot skinnier, but since I know that particular area fairly well, there's no reason for anyone to dick around at that place. Hunters never hunt in that area either, plus I never saw any parked cars nearby either, not for miles. Now I gotta point out that I'm as critical towards any kind of supernatural/spoopy stuff as the next reasonably sane grown dude out there. So at best, it could have just been the hind legs of some asshole moose. We don't really have many animals with legs that particular size here, and at worst it could have just been my brain playing tricks on me. Or both. Probably both, though if it was a moose, I'm pretty sure I would have seen his head peeking through, considering those particular trees were fairly short too, yet I didn't. I live in Victoria, Australia, and there have long been legends of big cats in the area, particularly in the western region. If you look around on the net there are websites devoted to sightings full of videos and photos and the like. I've lived here my whole life and never really thought too much about it. I live in one of the larger towns here and recently started dating a lady who lives on a farm about 20 minutes out of town, a pretty straightforward trip up the highway, one turn off and along a dark, unlit, narrow country road for the last 5 minutes. I've done this trip a few times and nothing out of the ordinary until 2 weeks ago. As I was driving down the unlit road with my high beams on, I noticed movement on the road ahead, then 2 glowing eyes. As I got closer I saw it was a black cat. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized how big it was. It stood up and was as high as the bonnet of my car. Its tail was thick. The thing was ducking huge. It was no ordinary cat. As I got about 10 meters from it, it took off into the nearby bushes. I slowed down and redirected my car's headlights into the bushes, but I couldn't see anything, and after a few moments I continued on to my lady's house. I told her about it, and now I hate going out to her farm, sitting on the porch and staring out into darkness. Wyoming, very rural and working in oil fields overnight. It's the only place I've experienced inky blackness. I've read it 100 times, but only see it there. As you're crawling across a rough dirt road in the middle of a huge ranch and dozens of miles away from so much as a street light. You don't light up the road, the darkness just barely retreats from you and hides in every crevice and rut as you approach. And animals. Like hearing weird clicking noises and occasional taps directly above me, on top of big silos and tanks maybe 60 feet high. Get to the side and see a huge and glorious white barn owl. One time I'm pretty sure it was a hog-owl brown owl keeping an eye on me, but he was also very good at staying out of sight when I tried to track him down. Pretty sure he was watching me the entire time. Creeped me out a bit. And once got spooked by some cows and horses, different ranches respectively. Doing the inky blackness thing, I put pressure on the brake pedal and in my mirrors a large bulk gets illuminated red off the left of my trailer. I rub my eyes and look around more, and there are also tiny red dots kind of around it, and vaguely out my windows. I turned on my spotlight and shone it around, and there was a couple horses chilling near the road out of sight of my headlight but reflecting the red brake lights back at me. Definitely a little spooky but normal. I used to run a moving company in Southern California, and most of what I did was local stuff. Sometimes I would get jobs that would send me up to San Jose, Bakersfield, Merced, Northern California cities. Every once in a while I would get an out-of-state job. My favorites was going to Seattle. I really love that drive, and frankly I just really like driving. It's totally relaxing and doesn't feel like work at all for me. Anyways, this last time me and my brother-in-law are somewhere in Oregon at a rest stop. At 3 a.m. we always drove straight through cause there were two of us, so our logs books were always in order. Anyways, we're standing there having a smoke, when all of a sudden like 5 homeless hippie-looking junkies just walk right out of the ducking woods. Tripped us the duck out. Anyways, they walk into the bathroom and each of them obviously had shot up, cause they came out of the bathroom looking ducked up. They tried to strike up a conversation with us, but I am pretty sure they were going to rob us. I lived in Wyoming and I was coming back from seeing family for the holidays. We had left later than planned, causing us to arrive later than planned. From my mom's house to mine was about 8 hours in the car. It was around 2 a.m. and we were about 20 minutes from home. I lived in the second most unpopulated county of Y. So there was nothing for miles and miles. No other cars, no houses, just nothingness that Wyoming is infamous for in many places. I knew this road and had kept a keen eye out. I saw movement and immediately slowed to almost a stop. There was a pronghorn in the road. I tried going around it, but it took off running the same direction I was going. So I started to follow it. On a highway that is posted 70, I was doing 10 miles per hour behind this animal. It was in the road before a curve of the road. I tried going around, but this pronghorn was content on keeping me behind it. We round the corner and to my surprise, a herd of maybe 30 elk were on the road. Just standing. I, nor my wife remember seeing the pronghorn get out from in front of us. If it hadn't been for him, I would have slammed into a herd of elk at 70 miles per hour and possibly killed my family in the process. Because they were after the curve, I wouldn't have seen their reflection in time to have slowed. I was driving through the Eifel Regio in Germany, rural, lots of forests and hills. I'd been driving for about 900 kilometers that day and was just a few kms away from the place we would spend the weekend. In Germany the speed limit outside the city limits is 100 kilometers per hour. So I was doing between 95 and 105 kilometers per hour most of the time. As it was dark, almost no traffic, and we wanted to get to the holiday park to eat. So just cruising along, suddenly I saw a deer cross the road in front of me. I started braking and steered just around the back of the deer. But just as I was a few meters away from the deer, a second one followed directly in its path. While still having a speed of around 70 kilometers per hour, there was nothing I could do except for keep going and mentally brace for the impact about a quarter of a second later. Luckily the deer was the perfect height for getting hit by my car, as my bumper took most of the damage. I stopped as fast as I could and drove back to the place of impact, but the deers were already gone, including the one I hit. Me and my passenger, actually walked around there for about 15 minutes with our phones' flashlights on to collect pieces of my car and see if the deer would be somewhere on the road, in the ditch or in the field next to the ditch. But we couldn't find the deer. I found my license plate about 20 meters past the point of impact, picked up all the scattered pieces of bumper, and it took me another 15 minutes, and later 3 more stops and a few minutes of work, to fix the loose hanging parts on the front before I could drive the car to the holiday park. The next day we went there to see if we missed something in the dark, but there was not a trace of the deer. So let's hope it survived. It amazes me how little damage the car actually got. Just the bumper, the mounting points of the headlight and little parts like the grille got damaged. And I am extremely grateful it was just a small deer, as a larger animal would have been pushed through my windscreen, with a lot more problems. In the 1990s I lived in Hemel Hempstead, England. Due to health reasons at the time I neither drank alcohol nor took any drugs. One hot night in what I believe was the summer of 1995 I had been visiting friends, I'd cycled over and I made my way home well after dark, probably about midnight. The quickest way to my place included a diagonal crossing of the town's park, Gatebridge Park. It was a large and unlit place, and the only light in it was from the streetlights of the Leighton Buzzard Road down one side of the park. I was crossing from the other side towards the LB Road when I realized someone else was crossing the park on a heading which would intersect with my route. I was wearing a black t-shirt and riding an unlit bike, and I was near the stand of bushes that at the time, since removed, were growing about 50 meters from the toilet block, so I just stopped there, comfortable that I was functionally invisible, waiting for whoever else was out there to be no longer between me and my exit. As the walker drew near they never deviated from their diagonal route, which took them within about 20 meters of where I was, and they passed between me and the lights of the road, so I got a good look at them as they headed towards the line of trees on the path down to the white bridge that gives the park its name. It was a man. Bald, bare-chested, hugely muscular, carrying what appeared to be a sword and wearing a kilt but nothing else. He was already crossing my path. I still reckon I hadn't been seen, so I froze in place waiting for him to be further away before I would make a dash for it on my bike, watching him all the time in case he turned towards me. Then he walked through the trunk of a tree. It wasn't a line of sight thing. The tree was only about 15 meters away and he was walking more or less away from me at that point, through it, emerging the other side and keeping on going. I fled. Many years ago I was on what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciled out of one city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciled out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at about 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside of my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and is trying to alert me to something, or else he is just a pain in the ass and I will need to throw something at him to scare him off. It is important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and was barking at me. His eyes were crazy and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. I'm out exploring, and I'm in yet another impressively extra rural area. The county road here follows the creek, then suddenly turns away from it and comes up out of the valley. There is a series of 90-degree turns navigating fields whose owners saw to it that the local roads wouldn't be a perfect grid pattern. It's fast approaching dusk on a long summer day, the windows are down and I'm playing my iPod on the radio with one of those transceivers that picks an empty radio station to broadcast on. The next 90-degree jog comes up, and I find that it can go on straight if I so choose. No mailbox, there's even a road sign. It is a public road. There was no bridge out sign, no road closed, nothing. The road, if you went straight, wasn't paved. It was barely gravel, small brooks. Here the gravel just used bigger rocks. I hit a real big bump, and my radio suddenly comes in clear as day. Do you want to die a virgin? I laugh it off, noticeably shaken. I murmur, ha, not possible. It goes back to static immediately, and to my left, a meadow opens up through the trees. My worries are immediately gone, and I tear off down a small decline into the meadow, exploring in 4x4. It's getting darker, so I head back to the trail/road and turn to continue the way I was going originally. The radio is coming in and out with unintelligible talking. I reason to myself that it's one of those audiobook channels. I come up to a dead end. There's no way to turn around. The trail/road used to have a bridge here, but it's long gone and before me is air and water. I'm trying to figure out if I want to try to turn around or what to do, and I notice 5 people, 2 across the way where the road begins again, 1 on the bank opposite me, and 2 downstream on the bank I'm on. They're all staring at me. Assuming I've interrupted some fishing time, I back out down the trail/road towards the current roads until I find a clearing wide enough to turn around. I decide to go through the meadow once more, not creeped out at all, honestly. I should have been. After some time in the meadow, I notice a spot in the tree line where I could go down to some very wet dirt and go for it. I get down there and horse around a bit. The radio comes on. Have you made your decision? Okay, now I'm a bit creeped out, and decide to keep my cool but exit the area. The radio is now silent, not static. I make to go up the incline back into the meadow, but can't quite do it with the slippery mud. The radio comes back. Time's up, we're coming. Okay, engage fully freaked out mode. I turn off the radio and shift it into 4 low and gun it. I make it up the incline into the meadow, and notice all 5 guys are now in the tree line of the meadow, glaring. I nope out of there at full speed, and go flying down the trail/road back to the real road just in time to see the sun deep below the horizon. The drive home was silent, and mentally exhausting. I have never returned there.